A 125-year-old man, surrounded by tens of thousands of elves, came to this 86-year-old woman. It's hard to believe that this man is the old woman's long-lost father. But why, at over 100 years old? But how did he stay so young for over 100 years? It turns out that more than 80 years ago, Arthur the scientist was in the forest. He met an elf by chance. He wrote down the race and habits of every type of elf in the elven book. But to his surprise, he did so. He caught the attention of the great lord of the forest. If he could only get his hands on this book, he could control all the elves. To protect the elf book, Arthur set up a protective circle around the house. But if nothing goes wrong, accidents are bound to happen. To protect his daughter who had accidentally stepped out of the protective circle, in the midst of a fight with the toad elves, Arthur was taken hostage by a group of wind elves, and so Arthur and the fairy book were lost. It wasn't until 80 years later that Arthur's great-grandson Sean, he accidentally found it, and he met the mouse fairies who were guarding it. The mouse genie told Sean the elvish code had reappeared on Earth. The great lord would surely sense it. There's going to be a lot of bloodshed. As we speak, Sean's twin brother Hemmer accidentally stepped out of his protective circle. The leaves were blowing around him. Suddenly, Hemmer was knocked to the ground. The Mouseketeer gave Sean a revealing stone. Sean put it on and looked. He found some toadstools dragging Helmer deep into the forest. In order to save Hemmer, Sean followed him with the elf book. But when he got there, he found there were millions of toadstools guarding the place, and Hemmer was hanging from a tree on the side. Sean was terrified and didn't know what to do. While he was thinking, suddenly a mouthful of spittle was spat in his face. It was the snarling pig. His saliva. That allowed Sean to see all the invisible elves. He could see all the invisible elves because all of the roaring pigs people, the great lord, had made a suckling pig out of them. So they decided to rescue Hemmer first and plan together how to kill the great lord. With the help of the snarling pigs, Sean managed to rescue Hemmer and made it safely back into the protective circle. But his sister, who was still hanging around outside the circle, knows nothing about the invisible toad. The leaves on the ground were windless. Suddenly the girl's hand was slashed, and a slit in her thigh. Sean saw this, immediately threw the manifestation stone to his sister. With the help of the manifestation stone, the toadstools around her were exposed. After some fighting, sister managed to escape the toadstools' attack. She was able to hide in the protective circle, but there are more and more toadstools around. Since they were looking for the elf book, Sean decided to burn it in front of the toadstools, and burn it in front of them. A complete death sentence for them, but the book was forbidden. It couldn't be burned. The only way out now is to find help from their grandmother through the tunnel. But as soon as they entered the tunnel, they were discovered by the toadstool. The toadstool immediately summoned a giant mole to hunt them down. Sean is accidentally caught by the mole. He was about to be reduced to a pulp. In the nick of time, Sean immediately grabbed an iron bar and stabbed the mole. Then he and his sister managed to climb out of the well cover. The mole genie tried to climb out again, but a passing car rashly ended his life. At the nursing home, Sean took out the elf book, asking his grandmother, "How can I destroy the elf book?" But his grandmother said that only his grandfather Arthur would know how to destroy it. As soon as the words were spoken, Toadstool appeared out of nowhere. In the panic, pages were torn out of the book, and worst of all, one of the pages happened to contain the way to release the protective circle around the house. They were running out of time. According to the instructions in the book, with a single incantation, they managed to summon their grandfather's mount, the eagle lion, and brought them to the valley where the wind elves were. Here they finally met their grandfather Arthur. They wanted grandfather to help them defeat the toadstool, but instead they found a lonely. In the end it was up to them. By the time they returned home again, tens of billions of toadstools had surrounded the house. Sprinkle a large amount of salt in the doorway and hang mugwort on the windows. Then prepare a large number of tomato bombs. When everything is ready, just waiting for the toadstool to attack. And sure enough, on the night of the full moon, the toadstool really did break the protective circle around the house. Although protected by salt and mugwort, the toadstools were prevented from entering the house, but they still managed to get in through various gaps. Every time one came in, Sean would attack them with tomato bombs ready to attack them. But more and more toads are coming in. They had no choice. They had to put the tomato bombs in the microwave. When all the toadstools had entered the room, then they set the microwave on fire and blew it up. With this explosion, the toadstool minions were almost eliminated. All that was left was the big boss, the great demon king. But at that moment, the door to the attic was thrown open with force. The person who came in was Sean's father. Sean's parents had been divorced for many years. Under such circumstances, how could his father be in the house? Sean saw what was going on right away and stabbed his father straight in the face with a knife. Not surprisingly, the father was indeed a demon in the form of the great lord. With a flick of his hand, he took out his mother and brother Helmer. Sean took the opportunity to climb up to the roof. The daemon was right behind him. There was nowhere else to go. Sean takes one look at the snarling pig not far away. He made one last decision. He threw the elf book into the air. The daemon jumped at it and changed into a bird in the air. But as soon as he caught the elf book, he was grabbed by a snarling pig and shoved it into his mouth. And that was it. The great demon became the pig's lunch. The crisis was over. The next day Arthur, guarded by a group of wind elves, he met his 86-year-old daughter. Her father had been hiding her. He had been hidden by the wind sprites for 80 years. They never thought they would meet again 80 years later. With the help of the wind spirit, the old woman was transformed back into her childhood form, and together with her father, to the valley where the wind fairy lives, to live happily ever after.